At a prestigious gala in Manhattan, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and whispered ambition, a moment unfolded that no one saw coming. An elderly woman accidentally spilled wine across the immaculate white tablecloth. Her son, a young millionaire, reacted not with concern, but with rage. He slapped her, right there, in front of a silent, stunned room. What he didn't realize was who was watching, and how that moment would cost him far more than his pride. But before we get into the full story, drop in the comments where you're watching from, and if stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing. The limo cut through the Manhattan traffic like a blade, polished, silent, and purpose-built. Behind the tinted glass, Nathaniel Nate Baltimore, 33 years old and sharper than the suit he wore, scrolled through company reports on his tablet. Next to him sat his mother, Harriet, early 60s, wide-eyed and quiet. She admired the interior like it was a different planet. She finally broke the silence, her voice warm. "Nate, where exactly is this gala being held?" Without looking up, Nate answered coolly, "Astoria Grand." Harriet smiled gently. "This is the first time I've ever been in this limousine. I'll remember this forever." She brushed her fingers across the soft leather. "When did you get it?" 5 years ago," Nate replied, eyes still glued to the screen. "Time really flies," she said, her voice drifting. "It's been so long since we've done anything together. I've missed you." She reached out, almost touched his arm, then stopped, pulling her hand back. "I'm proud of you, truly. A millionaire at your age. It's something." No reply. "Trying again?" she asked softly. "So, what's this event all about?" Nate finally glanced up, irritated. "It's about legacy and innovation, honoring leadership, showcasing long-term partnerships, introducing the next generation of business heirs. You wouldn't really get it. Just read the invitation." He shoved the ornate card into her hands. "Please, just don't ask questions. Try not to talk too much tonight." Harriet blinked, her smile faltering. "I see," she said quietly, turning the card over with trembling fingers. Nate continued, a touch less harsh, but still clipped. "I need you to keep it together tonight. I'm meeting Henry Caldwell, big name in infrastructure, respects tradition, family. He'll be there with his son, Ben, who's around my age, already running most of the business. It's important that I show I've got that too, a family foundation." Harriet straightened, trying to sound supportive. "And what's he like, this Mr. Caldwell?" "60s, sharp, very old school," Nate said, exhaling. "Ben's basically the next CEO. That's why you're here, to make us look grounded, presentable, like we've got a story that makes sense." There was a long pause. "So that's the only reason you invited me?" Harriet asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nate's jaw tensed. "Yeah, so what? Think of it as your ticket to a glamorous night, champagne, caviar, people who matter." Harriet looked away. "I just thought maybe you missed me." Nate's voice was cold now. "I miss Dad. He would have handled this night right, made connections, said the right things. I'm doing what he would have done." That sentence cut deeper than anything else. Harriet turned her face to the window, swallowing back emotion as memories of her late husband, Charles, rushed in like a tide. He had passed when Nate was a teenager, leaving them with more money than guidance. And though the inheritance was significant, Harriet hadn't known how to grow it. The company teetered for years, until Nate came of age and rebuilt it almost from scratch. She knew now how he saw her, fragile, ineffectual, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. And yet, he had no idea what this night would become. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself. If there was even the smallest chance to fix what was broken between her and Nate, she needed to get this night right. "I promise I'll give it my best," she said, her voice carrying a hopeful note that didn't quite match the tightness in her chest. Nate barely had time to respond before the limousine rolled to a smooth stop. "We've arrived at the Astoria Grand, sir," came the chauffeur's voice through the intercom. The door swung open. Nate stepped out first, his movements efficient, calculated, like everything else about him. He didn't even glance at her, but he extended his hand mechanically. Harriet still took it, holding on to the moment, no matter how cold it felt. As she climbed out, a quiet gasp escaped her lips. The view was breathtaking. A rich crimson carpet stretched toward the grand entrance, flanked by velvet ropes and flickering lanterns. The hotel's facade glowed under golden spotlights, marble columns, detailed stonework, glints of gold, like something from another world. Around them, guests glided past in sleek tuxedos and designer gowns, photographers snapping away. Harriet instinctively reached down, smoothing her blue dress. She suddenly felt out of place, like someone who'd wandered into a dream meant for someone else. Nate, already scanning the crowd, didn't notice. His mind was on strategy, on reputation, on gain. She gently placed her hand on his arm, and they stepped forward together, the carpet guiding them into the spotlight. Just before the main entrance, a well-dressed man with silver hair and confident posture stepped forward to greet them. His tailored suit was subtle but unmistakably expensive, and his smile was warm. "Mr. Caldwell," Nate said quickly, extending a hand. "It's good to see you again." Henry Caldwell gripped Nate's hand with the firm confidence of a man who built everything himself. "Nathaniel, welcome. Glad you made it." His eyes then shifted, softening as they landed on Harriet. "And this must be your mother. It's truly a pleasure, Mrs. Baltimore." For the first time that night, Harriet felt seen. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Caldwell," she said, offering her hand with a smile. "Please, call me Harriet." To her surprise, she was welcomed into the conversation like an equal. Henry spoke not like a tycoon, but like someone who understood hard work and family. He told them about his company, his decades in sustainable real estate and infrastructure, and how proud he was that his son Ben would soon take over. "Good to see some people still bring family along," Henry said with a glint in his eye. "Ben's around your age, Nathaniel. He's already running half the company." Harriet felt a genuine connection. There was kindness in this man, not just power. She remembered Nate's warning about making a good impression, but for the first time that evening, she wasn't performing. She was just being herself. Nate stepped in again, his voice polished and businesslike. "We're looking forward to speaking with you more after dinner." "Of course," Henry said warmly. "We'll catch up later. Enjoy the evening." As he moved on to greet others, Harriet walked beside Nate toward the ballroom, feeling a faint flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this night could be a turning point. But then, it happened. Just steps from the ballroom entrance, her heel snagged on a ripple in the carpet. Time slowed. Her arms flailed in a desperate attempt to recover, but gravity won. She landed hard on her hands and knees. Gasps stirred nearby, but they sounded far away. All she could feel was the heat rushing to her face. "Mom," Nate hissed, leaning down with a frozen smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Seriously?" He yanked her up gently enough to appear calm, but the tension in his grip told a different story. "How embarrassing," he muttered, glancing around. "Just walk straight. Please don't make this worse." "I'm sorry," Harriet whispered. "My heel. It's been years since I've worn shoes like this." Nate didn't respond. He simply guided her into the ballroom, his jaw tight. The room they entered was nothing short of spectacular. A vast space bathed in golden light, its ceiling stretched high above like a cathedral of luxury. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above round tables wrapped in white linen. The clink of cutlery and the low murmur of high society conversations filled the air. Harriet tried to hold herself tall, but inside she felt small. She had hoped to make Nate proud tonight, to be part of his world, if only for an evening. But all she'd done was confirm his worst assumptions. As they took their seats, she silently made a promise to herself. She wouldn't give up. Not tonight. Not on him. Not yet. The ballroom was a vision, every table draped in flawless white linen that shimmered under the chandelier light like moonlit snow. Despite the room's scale, the layout created a sense of intimacy, each table its own quiet island in a glittering sea of wealth and elegance. A waitress approached, her black and white uniform sharp against the swirl of colorful gowns and tailored tuxedos. Her footsteps made no sound on the thick carpet as she led Nate and Harriet to their table, which sat prominently near the center of the room. With practiced ease, she pulled out their chairs and laid crisp napkins gently across their laps. "Good evening, Mr. Baltimore, Mrs. Baltimore," she said in a soft, well-trained voice that matched the low hum of conversation in the room. "We'll begin dinner service shortly. For the main course, we offer several options. May I take your selections, including wine?" Nate answered first, confident and relaxed, perfectly at home in this world. "I'll have the Wagyu and a glass of red, thank you." Harriet hesitated. Her eyes flicked over the menu, heart racing at the unfamiliar names and pairings. She cleared her throat, her voice faint. "I think I'll have the salmon, Mom." Nate didn't raise his voice, but the sharpness of his tone cut clean through hers. He leaned in slightly, his words ice cold. "Not that. You don't want to stink like fish when we talk to Henry later. Pick something else." Harriet's cheeks burned. The heat crawled up her neck. She could feel the waitress still standing beside her, silent and still, her neutral face unreadable. And yet Harriet imagined she could see judgment, or worse, pity, in her eyes. "I'm sorry," Harriet murmured, forcing a shaky smile. "I'll have the quail and red wine, please." The waitress nodded and scribbled softly on her notepad before gliding away into the crowd. No sooner had she vanished than Nate leaned in again, his voice lowered, but tight with urgency. "Mom, I need you to focus, just for a few hours. That's all I'm asking. This is a major business opportunity. No more slip-ups. Understood?" Harriet nodded quickly, twisting her napkin in her lap. "Of course, Nate. I'll do better. I'm just happy to be here with you." But Nate wasn't listening anymore. His gaze had already returned to the room, analyzing, calculating, tracking who was talking to whom. His expression shifted constantly, a silent language of strategy. To Harriet, he looked less like her son and more like a man hunting opportunity in a sea of polished smiles. She watched him silently, her chest tightening. She was proud of him, of everything he'd achieved. But where had the boy she once knew gone? When did ambition replace warmth? Still, she tried again. "You know, Nate," she said, her voice gentle, uncertain. "Your father would be so proud of you. I am too. I just smile and stay quiet until the deal is done, Mom," Nate interrupted, eyes flicking toward her with visible irritation. "That's all I need tonight." Harriet sat back, her mouth closing around the words she hadn't finished. The hurt settled deep in her chest, sharp and silent. She folded her trembling hands and straightened her back, determined not to show it. Then the lights dimmed. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage, his voice booming with polished energy through hidden speakers. Applause swelled through the ballroom in waves, but Harriet barely heard it. Her own heartbeat drowned it all out. She focused on her posture, on the polite expression frozen on her face. She had to be perfect, invisible, composed, just the kind of companion her son wanted. No trouble, no emotion, just presence. From across the room, she looked like a woman of grace and dignity. But inside, Harriet Baltimore had never felt more alone. The air around her shimmered with perfume and applause, but she sat in silence, drowning beneath the weight of her son's expectations, struggling to breathe. Just then, the server returned, silent as a shadow, gliding between tables with a tray full of wine glasses and the kind of grace only years of practice can teach. And Harriet? She held herself still, her hands folded like armor, her smile unwavering, because now, more than ever, she knew the spotlight could turn cold in an instant. The server moved like a shadow, his tray floating between tables as though suspended on air. Each crystal glass shimmered with deep red wine, rich, elegant, and somehow ominous in its stillness. "Your wine, sir, madam," he murmured, setting the glasses down with near-silent precision. Nate didn't even blink. His focus remained glued to the stage, his eyes narrowed as he calculated every word from the speaker, already mapping out connections, angles, leverage. He didn't notice the server. He didn't notice his mother. Harriet, on the other hand, was spiraling. She needed to do something, anything to prove she belonged, that she could be part of this world, that she wasn't just a ghost in his shadow. Her hand reached for the wine glass, trembling slightly as her fingers wrapped around the stem. The cut of the crystal felt foreign, heavy. She tried to lift it smoothly, but time betrayed her. The liquid inside tilted toward the rim. A single ruby drop hovered, then fell, and with it, everything shattered. A quiet splash, a violent bloom of red against white linen. The stain spread across the tablecloth like an accusation. Droplets freckled her dress, stark against the soft blue fabric she'd chosen so carefully. Harriet froze, her breath caught in her throat. Nate's head snapped toward her, eyes wide, jaw tight, and in that moment, before she could stammer an apology, his hand lashed out. The slap cracked like lightning. It wasn't loud, but to Harriet, it drowned out everything. The music, the speeches, the clinking glasses, all gone. Her cheek lit up with fire, and her eyes flooded instantly with tears. "You're so embarrassing," Nate hissed, voice coiled with contempt. "You can't even hold a glass of wine. You should have just ordered water. Honestly, what's wrong with you?" His words cut deeper than his hand. Harriet blinked rapidly, trying to keep her tears from spilling. Her makeup, her dignity, everything was slipping. The wine's bitterness lingered on her lips, mixing with the salt of her shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice breaking. "The lighting, I didn't see clearly. I'll clean it up. I'll go to the restroom." Nate's jaw clenched. He looked around quickly, scanning for witnesses. Most eyes were still on the stage, oblivious to the scene that had just taken place. But he was paranoid. Every glance, every whisper, he felt it like a threat. "Fine," he spat. "Go, and tell the staff on your way out. I'm not taking the blame for this." Harriet nodded, rising slowly. Even the soft scrape of her chair against the carpet felt humiliatingly loud. She noticed the stain soaking deeper into her lap, an ugly blotch swallowing the color from her dress, the one dress she had picked with hope. "I'll let the server at the door know," she murmured, barely audible. She moved toward the exit, feet unsteady, as if the plush carpet had turned into shifting sand. The ballroom blurred around her, the chandeliers above twinkling like cold stars. No one seemed to notice, but in her mind, every gaze was fixed on her. Every smile was laced with judgment. At the door, she stopped beside the server. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, choking on the lump in her throat. "There's been a spill. Table 18. Could someone—" The server nodded gently, his voice kind. "Of course, madam. We'll take care of it immediately." She gave him a quick nod and stepped into the corridor. The air was cooler out here, sharp and startling against her flushed skin. It raised goosebumps on her arms, made her acutely aware of how exposed she felt. She just wanted to disappear, to get to the restroom, to breathe. But then, someone followed. A voice, low and calm, called out behind her. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you all right?" She froze. Turning slowly, Harriet found herself face to face with a tall man. distinguished, elegant, and deeply kind. His eyes were soft with concern, his tuxedo perfectly fitted. She recognized him. He'd been seated just behind them. Her heart sank. He had seen everything. I'm fine, she stammered, reaching instinctively to the spot on her cheek where Nate had struck her. It still burned beneath her fingers, and she wondered, was the mark visible? The man's eyes filled with something she hadn't expected. Not pity, but something closer to quiet outrage. There was sympathy in his eyes, but something else too. A quiet anger that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with what he had just seen. I couldn't help noticing what happened, he said gently, his voice low and steady. That man who slapped you, was he your son? Harriet's breath hitched. The question stung, not because it wasn't true, but because it was. This stranger had witnessed it all, the slap, the words, the shame, and still, even now, even after the sting on her cheek and the ache in her heart, Harriet found herself instinctively defending her son. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He is, but he didn't mean to. It was my fault, really. I was clumsy. Spilled the wine. It's a very important night. The man shook his head slowly, his eyes steady and full of something Harriet couldn't name. Compassion, perhaps, and disappointment. But not in her. No one deserves to be treated like that, he said softly, though there was steel beneath his words. Especially not by their own child. I would never lay a hand on my mother. Not for anything. Harriet felt her eyes fill again, but she blinked the tears away quickly, not wanting to fall apart again, especially not in front of a stranger. Then he extended his hand. I'm Ben Caldwell, he said warmly. Harriet froze. The name hit her like a shockwave. Ben Caldwell, the very person Nate had been so desperate to impress. And he had seen everything. Her heart sank, her mind racing. What if this ruined Nate's chances? What if... Mr. Caldwell, she said quickly, pasting a fragile smile on her lips. It's a pleasure. Your father? He seems like a wonderful man. We had the honor of meeting him briefly earlier. Ben smiled gently, his eyes never leaving hers. Please, call me Ben. There was something calming about his voice, reassuring without being patronizing. Yes, he continued, my father is a good man. He believes family should come first, always, in business, in life. Harriet nodded, though the words cut deep. Family first. The phrase landed in her chest like a stone. When had her family stopped meaning that? That's wonderful, she murmured, her voice barely holding. My son Nate, he's hoping to speak with your father tonight, about business. Ben's face changed at the mention of Nate. The warmth cooled slightly. There was a flicker of something, disapproval, maybe even anger, but it passed quickly, replaced by a diplomatic calm. I see, he said carefully. Then, more slowly, and how do you feel about that, Mrs. Baltimore? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years, maybe ever. Nate certainly hadn't. I'm proud of him, she said, but even to her own ears the words sounded thin, forced, lifeless. He's worked hard to rebuild what his father left behind. Ben nodded, watching her closely. There was something in his gaze that made her feel safe, like he was truly listening. And what's your role in the company? He asked gently. Harriet flushed, the shame rising quickly in her chest. Oh, I don't have one, she admitted. I'm not really involved. Nate handles everything. Ben nodded slowly. A shadow of sadness passed across his face. Sadness not just for her, but perhaps for what had been lost between mother and son. He opened his mouth, as if to say more, but Harriet stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm sorry, I really should. I need to clean up," she said, motioning toward her stained dress. The once beautiful fabric was now ruined by the dark, spreading mark of the wine. "My son will be wondering where I am." Ben hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Baltimore. Please, take care of yourself." She turned to enter the restroom, but he called softly after her. "Mrs. Baltimore?" She paused, hand on the door. "Just remember," Ben said gently, "you have worth, even if others don't see it." The words echoed in the hallway long after he turned and walked away. Inside the restroom, Harriet stood in front of the mirror, the harsh lighting revealing every line, every flaw. She dabbed at the wine stain, but it only seemed to spread, mocking her efforts. Her thoughts drifted back to a different life, a better one, when her husband Charles was still alive. When she would walk into rooms like this with confidence, grace, and the certainty that she belonged. Now she hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. The confident, elegant wife was gone, and in her place stood a mother who had been made to feel like nothing. The woman staring back at Harriet in the mirror wasn't someone who knew how to survive in a world built on influence and power. She looked lost, like someone who had failed not just her son, but the man who once believed in her the most. Tears welled up again as the memories came crashing in. 15 years had passed since Charles died. He had left behind not only a legacy and a thriving company, but an inheritance large enough to keep their lives secure. Harriet had never worked a day in business. She didn't have to. Charles had always told her job was at home, raising Nate, creating stability, and she had believed him. She thought she had done well, until he was gone. Left with everything but no idea what to do, Harriet used the inheritance to maintain their lifestyle, not realizing she was slowly draining the very foundation Charles had built. The company faltered. The money thinned. The future she was meant to protect began to fall apart. Nate had been the one to rescue it, but not without cost. Now she stood in front of a mirror under unkind fluorescent lights, dabbing at her makeup, trying to hide the tear stains and fix her eyeliner with a shaky hand. The small cosmetics bag she carried suddenly felt ridiculous, too small to fix what was broken. But she had to try. Nate needed her to get this right tonight, and despite everything, the slap, the words, the shame, she was determined not to let him down again. Harriet looked herself in the eye, gathered the last of her strength, and made a quiet promise. She would endure this, swallow her pride, hold her tongue. If that's what it took to earn back her son's respect, she would do it. She smoothed her dress, even though the stain was still visible, dark and unforgiving, a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. But there was no undoing it now. It was time to go back in, back to the ballroom, back to Nate. She stepped into the glow of the event hall once more, her heartbeat steady but heavy. Conversations still drifted across the room like music. Glasses clinked, silverware chimed against fine porcelain. As she approached their table, Harriet noticed the wine-stained linen had been replaced. A new white tablecloth gleamed in the soft light, their place settings reset with military precision. Nate was already eating, eyes glued to the stage. His steak was half gone. He hadn't waited. She sat down quietly. Her wine glass had been swapped out for plain water. The untouched quail still sat in front of her, the steam long gone. She glanced toward the table behind them. Ben Caldwell met her eyes, offering the smallest, kindest smile. She returned it with a gentle nod before looking back at her plate. Nate hadn't noticed the exchange, or had chosen not to. His attention was locked on the stage, jaw tense, eyes calculating. He was already somewhere else in his mind, thinking about the deal, about his next move, about impressing Henry Caldwell. Harriet picked up her fork and took a few polite bites, though her appetite was long gone. The food, undoubtedly exquisite, tasted like nothing, All she could think about was what came next, how her presence, her mistake, might ruin everything Nate had worked toward. When he finished his meal, a server approached and collected their plates. "I hope you enjoyed your meal," the young man said courteously. Nate glanced at her half-eaten dish and clicked his tongue. Harriet, catching the signal, set down her fork. "I'm done as well," she said softly. "You can take mine too." The server nodded and whisked the plates away. Then Nate finally looked at her. His gaze dropped to the stain on her dress. He didn't bother hiding his disdain. "The only way you can make up for tonight," he said quietly, his tone ice cold, "is to represent me properly when we speak to Henry later." He leaned in slightly. "Otherwise, don't bother coming back. Stay in your little house in the suburbs for the rest of your life, alone." The words hit harder than the slap. Harriet's throat tightened. "Nate," she whispered, "do you really mean that?" He looked at her like she was nothing. "You're weak," he said flatly. "I can't stand weak women." And just like that, he turned away again, locking his eyes back on the stage as if she no longer existed. Harriet sat frozen. The words echoed through her like thunder, humiliating, vicious, final. A part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, to remind him of who she was. But she didn't move. She couldn't. Not yet. She wasn't ready to give up. Not completely. As the servers returned with dessert, small, delicate confections placed carefully on fine china, Harriet folded her hands in her lap, her fingers trembling just beneath the linen. She would survive the rest of the night. But something inside her had changed. The dessert in front of Harriet looked exquisite, a delicate swirl of rich chocolate crafted to impress the city's most refined palates. On any other night, it might have delighted her. But now, it felt more like a cruel joke, a symbol of the relationship she'd once dreamed of having with her son. Sweet on the surface, hollow at the center. Around her, the energy in the ballroom shifted. Guests began rising, networking, drifting between tables as the formal dinner gave way to the business that truly mattered. Nate stood abruptly. "Wait here," he said, his tone clipped and cold. "Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. Just sit there and try not to embarrass me any more than you already have." And with that, he vanished into the crowd. Harriet was left alone. She picked up her spoon with trembling fingers and tried to appear composed, dignified even, as she forced herself to taste the chocolate. But each bite turned to ash in her mouth. Her eyes followed Nate across the room. He was already in his element, laughing, shaking hands, charming people with that easy confidence she had once adored in him. Surrounded by the glittering hum of power and prestige, Harriet Baltimore had never felt more out of place, more invisible. She sat there, still and silent, silently praying for strength, not just to survive the evening, but to somehow, impossibly, make her son proud. As the volume in the ballroom rose with post-dinner chatter and social maneuvering, Harriet stayed frozen. Her untouched dessert, her water glass, her folded hands, everything about her presence quietly screamed that she was trying not to be a problem. Nate finally returned, his face unreadable. "Well," he said with mocking sweetness, "look at you, sitting here, quiet and still, not bothering to network, just exactly what an ambitious person would never do." Harriet flinched. "But you told me not to move." "Ambitious people don't just sit there when they're told to," he snapped. "They read the room. They act. They think." She bit her lip, holding back a response, fighting the sadness welling up inside her. Any pushback now would only escalate things. She knew that. She had to endure. For his sake. She opened her mouth to respond, something calm, something careful, but stopped when she saw movement behind Nate. It was Henry Caldwell. His silver hair caught the light as he approached, a smile already forming on his face. Harriet raised a finger to her lips quickly, silently trying to warn Nate. He misunderstood, scowling. "What now?" he began, but then Henry's voice rang out behind him. "Nathaniel, Mrs. Baltimore, I hope you're enjoying the evening." Nate spun around, his demeanor flipping in an instant. The scowl vanished, replaced with a dazzling smile, his voice warm and enthusiastic. "Mr. Caldwell, yes, absolutely. It's been a fantastic evening. Thank you so much for hosting us." Harriet stood as well, smoothing down her dress, praying the stain wasn't too obvious. She extended her hand with a polite smile. "It's been lovely, Mr. Caldwell. Thank you for your generosity." Henry shook her hand warmly. "Please, call me Henry. I'm so glad to hear you've enjoyed yourselves." He turned to Nate. "You mentioned you wanted to speak about business. I'd be happy to chat about potential collaborations." "Yes, absolutely," Nate said, practically buzzing. "I'd be honored." "Excellent," Henry said. "Let's step into one of the private rooms. It's getting a bit noisy in here." As he spoke, a second figure joined them. Harriet's breath caught when she saw who it was. Ben Caldwell. His kind eyes met hers for a moment. A small flicker of recognition and something gentler passed between them. Ben turned to his father. "Dad, is this the Baltimore family you were telling me about?" Henry beamed. "It is indeed. Nathaniel, Mrs. Baltimore. This is my son, Ben. He'll be joining us for the conversation, if that's all right." Nate's smile faltered for just a second. A flicker of surprise, maybe even panic, but he recovered quickly. "Of course," he said, voice smooth. "The more the merrier, right?" Harriet stepped in to bridge the awkward beat. "It's lovely to meet you, Ben. Your father speaks very highly of you." Ben's gaze met hers again, soft and steady. "Actually," he said gently, "Mrs. Baltimore and I met earlier, just outside the restrooms." Nate froze. His eyes darted toward Harriet, tension sparking like electricity beneath the surface, but Ben only smiled. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Baltimore. I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation." Henry clapped his hands together. "Perfect. Let's head to the VIP room then. It's just down the corridor." Nate, clearly relieved that Ben had kept things diplomatic, nodded eagerly. "Lead the way." As the group began to walk, Harriet followed, her steps quiet but steady. She wasn't sure what this meeting would bring, but something told her the night wasn't over yet. Ben hadn't said a word about what he'd witnessed earlier, and Nate, clearly hoping to keep it that way, flashed an eager smile. "That sounds perfect," he said quickly. "Mom, why don't you stay here and enjoy the rest of the event? No need to bore you with business talk." But Henry raised a brow, gently interrupting. "Nonsense. Mrs. Baltimore should absolutely be included. After all, we're discussing her late husband's company, aren't we? I've always believed a family business should involve the entire family." Nate's jaw tightened. His smile twitched, strained at the edges. "Of course. You're absolutely right. Mom, please, join us." As they exited the ballroom, Harriet noticed how Ben held the door open for each of them. The gesture was simple, but to her, it landed like a stone in her chest. Nate had never done that for her. Not once. They stepped into the VIP room, a space that radiated quiet wealth. Polished mahogany walls, soft amber lighting, plush leather chairs. It felt like a boardroom wrapped in velvet, a place where decisions were made, legacies shaped. Harriet sank into a seat at the edge of the table, hands tightly clasped in her lap, hyper-aware of the stain on her dress and the unfamiliar terrain she'd stepped into. She wasn't here to speak. She was here to support. Nate, by contrast, thrived. He leaned forward with energy and focus, eyes gleaming. "Mr. Caldwell," he began smoothly, "thank you for taking the time. I believe there's a powerful opportunity here for collaboration between our companies." Henry listened, nodding, expression unreadable. "I'm always open to hearing new ideas, Nathaniel. Please, go ahead." Nate launched into his pitch. His voice filled the room with confidence, supported by slides on his tablet, charts, percentages, growth trends, innovation strategies. Harriet tried to follow, but the jargon blurred. It was like watching a performance in a foreign language, one she was expected to applaud, even if she didn't understand it. She nodded along, willing herself to appear composed. "And with your expertise in sustainable infrastructure," Nate concluded, "paired with our disruptive approach to real estate, we could build something that changes the game entirely." He sat back, eyes bright, waiting for approval. But Henry turned to Harriet. "And what about you, Mrs. Baltimore?" he asked kindly. "What are your thoughts? Do you support your son's direction?" The room fell silent. Harriet's heart stuttered in her chest. Her mouth opened, then closed. She hadn't expected to be addressed. Not like this. Not directly. Nate's eyes shot her a look, sharp, warning. But Henry held up a hand. "I'd like to hear from Harriet," he said, gently but firmly. She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. I agree with my son," she said. "He's worked very hard. I'm proud of what he's built." Henry nodded slowly, his gaze steady on her, too steady. She felt exposed, like he could see past the words, past the mask, to the confusion and fear just beneath her skin. "Tell me, Harriet," he said, leaning forward slightly. "How involved are you in the company's decisions and leadership today?" The air seemed to thin. Nate shifted, uncomfortable. Harriet felt a bead of sweat form along her temple. Not much, I'm afraid," she admitted. "My son handles most of it. All of it, really." Henry didn't flinch. "Interesting. And after your husband passed, was there no effort to bring you into the fold? It's a family company, after all. Wouldn't that have made sense?" Nate jumped in quickly. "With all due respect, Mr. Caldwell," he said, voice tighter now, "that's a private family matter. My mother has no business background. Starting from scratch would have taken too much time. I had to act quickly to preserve what my father built." Henry tilted his head ever so slightly. "I see," he said evenly. "So instead of helping her learn, you chose to keep her uninvolved?" Nate hesitated. The silence spoke louder than any response. Harriet sat still, her hands cold against her lap, her mind spinning. This conversation was heading somewhere she hadn't expected, somewhere her son clearly didn't want it to go. And for the first time that night, she realized Henry wasn't just asking about business. He was asking about values. Nate forced a laugh, but it came out hollow. She's not as young as she used to be." Henry gave a short, dry chuckle, though there was no humor in it. "My boy, that excuse might offend me," he said coolly. "I'm no spring chicken myself, but I learn something new every day." The room shifted. What once felt like a formal discussion had turned into a reckoning. The air had gone dense, tight with unspoken truths. Nate's earlier confidence was fading fast. He shot Harriet a fleeting look, as if just now remembering she was still sitting there, then turned back to Henry. "Mr. Caldwell," Nate said, his voice clipped with frustration. "I'm not sure I understand. We came here to discuss business. Why are we suddenly talking about my family?" Henry leaned back slowly, folding his hands, then glanced toward his son. Ben had remained silent until now, but his gaze had never left Harriet, watching her closely, reading her like a page no one else had bothered to open. "Nathaniel," Henry said, his voice quieter now, heavier, "I think we need to have a different conversation. My son told me everything, what he witnessed earlier tonight." Nate went still, his face turned pale. "He said you—" Henry hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Patted your mother a bit too hard on the cheek." Harriet's heart sank. The moment she had dreaded all evening had arrived. The carefully crafted performance, the illusion of success, unity, polish, was collapsing around them, and she could do nothing to stop it. The air in the VIP room had thickened into silence. Nate's color drained as he sat frozen, the mask of charm slipping from his face. Harriet sat equally motionless, staring at the tablecloth as her pulse thundered in her ears. Nate turned to her, his voice low and burning. "Mom, what did you do?" he hissed. "What did you say to them?" Before she could answer, Henry raised a hand. "Enough," he said firmly. "Your mother didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Ben saw everything. He was seated directly behind you. The slap, the insults. Nothing was missed." Nate looked as if he'd been struck himself. He opened his mouth, but this time, nothing came out. For once, the silver-tongued businessman had no defense. Harriet looked at her son, and for the first time that evening, she didn't feel small. She saw him, afraid, cornered, unraveling. And even now, despite it all, that old urge to protect him flickered to life inside her. She leaned forward, clasping her trembling hands tightly to still them. "Mr. Caldwell," she said softly, "please. I know how it must have looked, but Nate's under a tremendous amount of pressure. He's carried this company by himself since Charles passed. He's worked so hard to live up to that legacy, and I'm not as smart as he is. I don't understand the business world. But please, for the sake of the company, for my husband's legacy." Her voice trailed off when she saw Henry's expression shift. Disappointment etched into his features. Ben finally spoke. "Mrs. Baltimore," he said gently, "you don't have to make excuses for him. Pressure doesn't excuse cruelty, and no success justifies treating your own mother the way he did tonight." Nate, regaining some composure, straightened up and tried to retake control. "Mr. Caldwell, if there's been a misunderstanding, I apologize. But what happens in my family is private. It has no bearing on my ability to lead. I'm confident in what I bring to the table as a business partner." Henry nodded slowly, measuring his words. "I understand, Nathaniel," he said, "and I appreciate your mother's effort to shield you. It's admirable. But we can't ignore what we've seen, especially in light of what our research has turned up." Nate frowned. "Research? What do you mean?" Ben leaned forward, calm but firm. "We always do a full review before entering major partnerships. While examining your company's background, we found that you bought out your mother's shares years ago." Harriet's breath caught. "What?" she said softly. She remembered signing the papers. Nate had explained them quickly, something about simplifying ownership. She hadn't fully understood. She hadn't asked questions. And now, the truth hit her like a wave. He had taken everything. Nate's face hardened, his voice sharpening. "You're telling me you're terminating the deal over a private matter?" Henry raised a hand, steady. "Not necessarily, but if there's going to be any partnership between our companies." He paused, his voice settling into something final. "There will be conditions." Nate's expression twisted in disbelief as Henry's voice turned firm, unshakable. "Effective immediately," Henry said. "All current deals between our companies are terminated." Nate's face fell, shock and rage flickering in his eyes. But before he could speak, Henry raised a hand. "However," he continued, "we're willing to reconsider the partnership on 2 conditions, and they are non-negotiable." He turned to Harriet. His gaze softened, but his voice stayed resolute. "First, Mrs. Baltimore must be fully involved in the company's management from now on. She'll be trained, guided, and taught. No more sidelines." Ben added, "Second, her shares in the company must be reinstated. She deserves not only a role, but a stake. She's part of this legacy." Nate recoiled as if slapped again. "You can't be serious," he snapped. "She doesn't know the first thing about running a company. She nearly lost it. I had to step in and save everything. And those shares, I bought them, fair and square." Harriet winced at his words, truth laced with cruelty. "Nate," she said gently, I didn't know anything back then about the company, about managing money. I used the funds to keep us afloat because I didn't know how to build on what your father left, but I didn't understand what I was signing. I thought I was just letting you take over, not giving it all away." Henry nodded slowly. "Exactly why this must change, Nathaniel. Your mother didn't fail you. She was never given the chance to learn. This isn't just about growth, it's about legacy. And family legacy must be shared, not hoarded." Nate's frustration boiled to the surface. "Why does this matter to you?" he asked, voice sharp. "This is our company, our family. Why do you care how we run it?" Henry leaned forward, his voice unwavering. "Because how you treat your family is how you'll treat your business partners. It tells me everything I need to know about your character. And if you can't stand beside your own mother, why should I believe you'll stand beside me?" He paused, letting the words settle. "This isn't just about numbers, Nathaniel. A company like yours might do well for the next 10 years, maybe 15, but without the foundation of integrity and shared values, it won't last. I don't want to build with someone who can't see that." Silence followed. Nate sat frozen, jaw tight, eyes searching for a way out, but finding none. Harriet, for the first time in years, felt something she hadn't dared to feel. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. Maybe she could finally understand the world her husband had built and rebuild something even more important, her connection with her son. Nate finally exhaled. His voice, when it came, was strained, but resolved. "Fine," he said. "I'll do it. I'll train her. I'll involve her." Henry gave a small nod of approval, then reached into his briefcase and slid a document across the table. "Then sign this," he said. "It reflects our updated agreement, her reinstatement, her authority, and your commitment." Nate hesitated. Then, with a stiff hand, he signed. Harriet followed, her name shaky on the page, but certain. Henry smiled, but he wasn't finished. "There's one last thing," he said. "When we return to the main hall, you'll make a public statement. You'll apologize to your mother, in front of everyone, and you'll welcome her into the company, not quietly, proudly." Nate's head snapped up, his composure slipping. "You're joking. That would destroy my reputation." Henry didn't blink. "Your mother defended you like you were still a child, even after what you did. You owe her this." Harriet, stunned, looked at her son. "Nate, it would mean a lot. You've hurt me, especially tonight. But if you mean to change, this is the place to start." Ben chimed in quietly. "And just to be clear, this partnership will be monitored. One rep from our company, one from yours. If you can't follow through, it ends." Nate let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "This is unreal," he muttered. "But fine, whatever it takes." As the group rose to return to the event, Harriet felt a whirlwind of emotion, fear, nerves, but also something new, a quiet, rising spark of self-respect. The crowd's voices grew louder as they approached the ballroom once more. Glasses clinked, music drifted, laughter filled the air. Nate walked beside her, stiff, jaw clenched, his body braced for what was to come. Harriet took a deep breath as they reached the grand doors. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing. Tonight had changed everything, and there was no going back.